Oh, and my cat is moving the camera. All right, Amy, I think we can go ahead and get started if you want to.
Okay. Let's see. So welcome today to the data facing track. I'm glad you're all here and very happy to have a lot of our new steering committee joining. If you're interested in joining, getting more involved with CARC, you are looking at a slide of all of the opportunities, the way it's structured. CARC is like an ongoing conference with several different ways. There are the tracks. You're at the data facing track. If you're interested in other aspects of research computing, you can check out our other 4 tracks: researcher facing, systems, emerging centers, and strategic and policy facing. There are also working groups, interest groups, and operational groups. So just reach out to us, either the data facing coordinators, or you can contact the People Network as well, and get involved. And we're very happy today to have Lynette from ICPSR, one of my favorite databases, resources of all time. I use it as a gold standard in the class that I teach. So I'm very excited that Lynette is here to talk to us about ICPSR and the support that you are giving for data sharing, given all the new changes in policies and things that are still to come. So Lynette, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you for being here today.
Great, thank you for having me. I see that I was looking at the chat and I see that I guess I have to be the one to do the presentation. I can't, there's nobody that said that they were very familiar with ICPSR. I think Moira was the closest, but I won't make her do the presentation. So I am here to talk to you a little bit about who ICPSR is, and there were a lot of zeros in the meaning you've never heard of it. So I will do as much background to try to give you a sense of kind of who we are, what we are. What I thought we would talk about is the resources that ICPSR makes available related to data sharing and research in general, kind of broken down across the research lifecycle. And then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the kinds of data that ICPSR has and how you can find it and access it within our catalog. And then Amy and Deb asked me if I would talk a little bit about curation, which is what we consider sort of our special sauce. So I will talk a little bit about that at the end. I'm not a very formal presenter, so if you have questions throughout, if you want to just unmute and yell at me, that's fine. I'm not very good at watching the chat and presenting at the same time, but maybe if Amy or Deb could do that, that would be great. So feel free to ask questions as we go, or save them for the end. Either way, when I teach, I tell my students just throw something at me to get my attention. So however you can do that digitally, you're welcome to do that. I'm Lynette Holter. My official title, I guess, is Director of Instructional Resources at ICPSR. I also direct our Social Sciences Archive, Consortium Social Sciences Archive, and the National Archive of Data on Arts and Culture. But one of my favorite things is doing presentations like these, particularly to people who are less familiar with ICPSR. So you hear the letters ICPSR and they mean absolutely nothing to you. They stand for the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, which is a mouthful, and that's why we only use the letters. We're one of the world's oldest and largest social and behavioral sciences data archives. We started with political science, added the social somewhere in the 1970s, and decided, thankfully, to stop adding letters to our acronym, but we continue to take in different kinds of data, particularly as science gets more and more interdisciplinary. We were founded in 1962, so we just about 2 years ago celebrated our 60th anniversary. We've got almost 20,000 what we call studies, which are composed of one or more data sets, and I'll show you some examples of those in a little bit. We also have information about what's in those studies. So they're marked up at the variable level or the question level. And we've got just about 6,450,000 variables cataloged in our database. And those are all tied to about 113,000 data-related publications. And you'll kind of see how those are tied when we talk a little bit more about searching. We are a consortium, and so we've got more than 820 member institutions around the world. And basically, a lot of our data are freely available to anyone if the dissemination of the data has been paid for example, by federal funding. But a good chunk of our collection is actually curated and made available by the member dues. And so they're available freely to people at other member institutions and for a fee for people who are not at those member institutions. For people who have heard of us, more often than not, it's not just the data that they know about, or maybe not even the data at all, but they are often familiar with our summer program in quantitative methods of social research. And I put a link here. I should mention, I shared these slides with Deb and Amy, and I think they're in the document that Amy posted in the chat. So feel free to take them. I've tried to put lots and lots of links in so that you don't have to catch it as I'm talking. So thinking about what makes ICPSR unique, we aren't obviously the only data repository around, but we have been around for a long time and we focus on preservation. So we're always thinking about how can we make sure that the data are usable in the future. If you think about the technology changes between 1962 and now, we've sort of migrated through punch cards, data tapes, floppy disks, CDs for a hot second. Now everything is available online. So lots and lots of tech shifts during that time. We have pretty broad disciplinary coverage. When we look at our users, I think we discovered that there are at least 50 different disciplines represented in people who have created what we call Researcher Passport, or used to be called My Data accounts on the ICPSR website. We also have not only the data that we make available, but we point to data that are held elsewhere. It doesn't make sense for us to spend time and effort and money to curate data that other people make available already. And so a lot of times we'll just point to the data so that people can still find it when they come to ICPSR, but we're not duplicating effort. There was an agreement with several other archives a number of years back that we were all going to kind of follow that model. We have both curated and self-published studies, and I'll talk about the difference in those. I'll talk more about what curated data means later on. And we also try to help researchers by demonstrating how many people have downloaded their data. So we give them usage statistics for anyone who deposits data with us. In terms of resources that we make available, that's sort of above and beyond the data, lots of people have said that they will often use the ICPSR bibliography as a way to, if they're starting to think about a new project, maybe looking to see, has this been done before? Particularly if they've got a data set that they're interested in, they'll look and see what has been published using those data. or vice versa. They'll use the bibliography to figure out which data have been used to study the topic that they're interested in. We also have assistance with creating a data management plan. My animation on the bottom of the bibliography. I say publications, but we mean that pretty broadly. So presentations are included, dissertations, things like that, as well as actual journal articles and books and book chapters. We do have a couple different sources of information for doing data management plans. We will write a letter of support if somebody is planning to deposit their data with ICPSR at the end of their project. We will also help them think about a budget if they're working on data sharing as part of their actual grant budget. And that's often required by the National Institutes of Health now with their new policies. And this is just an example of the template for the data management and sharing plan from NIH. And I almost said NIA, which is a part of NIH. But we have sort of already filled in some of the parts that refer to ICPSR. And we give helpful directions in yellow to like take out the yellow directions before you PDF it and submit it with your grant proposal. In education, we also offer a pre-registry or a registry where people can say what they're going to do before they do it. This is becoming more and more common across different disciplines, but we happen to have the registry for education studies. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And you can search the registry to see what people have said that they're going to do. For people who are collecting their own data, we've got language that you should use on informed consent so that the data can be shared afterward. We used to all be taught, to only say that only the researchers will have access to the data. They'll be kept in a locked cabinet, blah, blah, blah. We still want the locked cabinet and all that kind of stuff, but we don't want you to say only the original research team will have access to the data because that limits data sharing then in the future. So we've got some example language that you can use if you're writing an informed consent document. Our social science variables database is one way to search our collection, but you can also think of it as a question bank. And this is sort of an example of what it looks like. The first screenshot that popped up was the results from a search about climate change. And then if you click into any of the variables, you can compare them like you would a refrigerator at Home Depot or anything like that. And then you'll get the full question text, the response options and the frequencies, as well as a link back to the study that included that question. I also love this as a teaching tool if anybody's teaching research methods. A little bit later on in the research process, as you start to think about collecting data and documenting your research process, especially if you're thinking about data sharing, we've got a guide for social science data preparation and archiving. It's actually just a really good best practices guide. I often recommend this to graduate students. It's got really sort of operational information in it. How should you name your file? How should you, what variables should you keep? What variables should you drop for disclosure review purposes, things like that. It also does include information about writing your data management plan. But this is a good guide, whether you're thinking about depositing with ICPSR or not. We're now skipping the whole doing your research project because we'll talk about doing it with secondary data in a minute, but pretend you're finishing with it and you're wanting to share your data. We often get asked whether ICPSR is the right place for people to share their data. And so this list of questions is something that I often will share with potential depositors to get them thinking about why they're sharing and what the best outlet might be. So it might be that their journal editor is requiring that they share, and they might have a particular place where you need to do that. Or their university has a repository and they're required to share there. A question that people don't always think about is, where will somebody look for data like yours? You'll see the kinds of data that ICPSR has, and one of the things that you'll see we don't have is a lot of purely hard science data. We don't have a lot of pure physics data. People wouldn't look for that here. So putting physics data in ICPSR is probably not your best bet. You also want to think about, does the place you want to put it have a long history? Do they think about preservation, or are they just about dissemination in the moment? And then thinking about support for people who might use your data in the future. So will the repository or the archive create documentation if you don't provide it to help people use your data, or will they basically just put up what you make available? Both are completely valid. And then you want to think about if your data might be sensitive, if you've got human subjects, can the repository handle that? And will the repository help you show the impact of your work? Data sharing with ICPSR is currently in two separate sort of streams. We've got our curated collection, which is what I'll talk about for the rest of the presentation. And then we've got our self-publishing repository called Open ICPSR. That's a great place to put replication data. So if you're publishing an article and the journal editor says, hey, you need to share your code, or you need to share your data and your code, that's a great place to put it. You get an immediate DOI. What you put up is what people get. Within this calendar year, our goal is, we're working on the infrastructure right now to sort of streamline that, so that you can, right now, if you're depositing in the curated collection, you use one deposit form, and if you're depositing in self-published, you use another one. And they actually go to two completely separate systems. We're working on integrating that so that we have a single stream ingest and dissemination. So the differences between the self-published pages and the curated pages will be much smaller. And we're, if you're interested in the dissemination piece, I believe they're targeting June 1st to for our launch of the new study homepages that should look similar for self-publishing and curated data. If you've decided that ICPSR is the place you want to deposit your research data, we've got a number of helps on the website. And again, these are all linked. We've got a quick video. We also have specific information for people who are depositing data collected under NIH funding. And we've got a list of our archives of record that can be used. The general archive, or our consortium archive, as we're now calling it, is also an okay place. We've gotten the okay from NIH for that as well. We have specific resources if you're sharing qualitative data. We're getting more and more of that in. And people were asking questions about, how do you de-identify qualitative data? How do you prepare the files to share them? That kind of thing. That's in that guide. And then we also have a guide if your data are restricted, if they contain sensitive information or require confidentiality, that kind of thing. So there's a resource there for that. Now the part about sort of finding and accessing data if you're doing secondary analysis. And I know a lot of you may not be doing the analyses yourself, but you might be working with people who are looking for data or things like that. So just a quick overview of what you will and won't find. So I mentioned that you will find social sciences, social and behavioral sciences super broadly defined. That means we've got data about individuals, lots and lots of data about individuals, from early prenatal care even up through end of life, so covering the full lifespan. We've got data about institutions and programs like Head Start or colleges and universities, libraries, art museums, things like that, as well as data about events. And the time period is pretty broad. The study that covers the oldest time period that we have goes back to 1192. So we don't have a lot from that old, but we do have quite a wide span of data, of history covered. And we have both public and restricted use data, which I'll talk about in a minute. We don't have a lot of images, but we are incorporating that. Again, as interdisciplinarity comes in, we've got brain scan images in studies of adaptation to strokes, for example. We are also getting more and more qualitative data, as I mentioned. We've got several collections of video data. And we've just this last year started a social media data archive. So for those of you who are librarians, you'll know that you might find the humor in the fact that we have metadata about all of our data, but we also have Meta's data. So we do have data from Facebook and Meta. You won't find answers to questions that you might ask Google. So often students will come to us and want to know, what's the population of this city or something like that. That kind of thing, you're better off asking Google. We might, if you put it in our search results, we'll give you results that you'll have to analyze and find the answer. So we've got the underlying data, but not necessarily the summary charts or the tables. We do have some of that, but that by far that's not the most of our data. You won't find any identifiable information about individuals or organizations. For the same reason, you won't find data to use in GIS or other mapping packages. We've got, again, a couple studies that have geocodes on them, but for the most part, when we do our disclosure risk review, one of the first things that we take off is geographic identifiers. So people often come to us and say, hey, do you have data that I can use for my class, for example, in GIS? And we have to say no, because that often is one of the first things that comes off. This slide just shows you the data that have been most commonly downloaded in the last fiscal year. So since July 1st of 2023. And the reason that I included this slide was basically just to show you the breadth of coverage. The National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health will always be our most commonly downloaded. It is the most commonly downloaded by far, but that's because there is so much you can do with it. There are 42 different data sets within AdHealth, more all the time. And it includes data about the students. They started collecting data in the early 90s, I believe, and followed focal students, had information from their parents and their teachers, information about their schools, information about their peer networks, their friend networks, and then they followed them over time and added new cohorts in. So lots and lots can be done with that. That will almost always, well, I would go so far as to say that will always be our most common study. But in the rest, it's fun to watch it shift as society shifts. So a number of years ago, we had lots and lots of studies in the most popular downloads about police community interaction, for example. So it's fun to watch the trends in what people are studying. How to find things within ICPSR. I mentioned that we have almost 20,000 studies. That is our strength, but it could also be a weakness if you're not quite sure how to find what you want. We try to make it easy to start the search. So you'll always have a search bar at the top of any of the ICPSR pages. There's also the Find Data tab and a search box on the Find Data page as well. If you type in a search, the example that I used here is youth mental health. This is what your search results will look like. You've got filters on the left-hand side, so you can look, for example, for data that are publicly available as opposed to restricted. You can look for data in a particular statistical package. You can look for qualitative versus quantitative, things like that. The middle arrow is a toggle where you can actually include the summaries of each of the studies in your search results so that you don't even need to click out on the study title to be able to see what it's about. Some of those are kind of long, so if we showed them by default, you might have like only 3 studies on a page because the summaries are long, but you can put those in there. And there's a couple different ways that you can sort your search. I mentioned that we have both curated and uncurated or self-published data. If you want to look only for curated data, you can include -open ICPSR in your search terms, and it'll take out all of those self-published data. That search searches everything. So the first tab that you'll get is the studies that match your search terms. So anywhere, whether it's in the title or the description or information in the code books, anything like that, it will bring that up. It also brings up, the variables. So anytime the words that you put in your search, in this case, youth mental health, occur in the variable name, label, value labels, or question text, it will show up as the second tab. And then it also searches the publications. So that data-related literature database that I mentioned. So there it's searching primarily the title, the abstract if we have it, but we don't have it for everything. So the 3 searches actually search different databases behind the scenes, but they return the results all in the same tabbed display. If you know that you are looking specifically for questions or for publications, it's best just to start with those, the social sciences variables database or the publications database. Again, they all come up in the same place, but sometimes, particularly working with students, the bibliography database is the one that is most similar to a library catalog, and so they're most comfortable with that kind of interface. We do have data that are in what we call thematic collections or topical archives, and to find those, you can go to the Find Data tab, click Thematic Data Collections, and then on the page that comes up, click Data Collections or Explore Data by Topic, and you'll get a list of the different topics. I've got a very busy slide here that includes the topical archives, sort of broken down by general area, so that you can have a sense of kind of what we have. These tend to be funded by government entities. So like the National Archive of Data on Arts and Culture, for example, is funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. So they have some say in what goes into those topical archives. Our contract is for 5 micro data sets a year for curation, and so they choose what 5 go in. So the thing to remember is that if you do a search and you start it on the homepage for one of these topical archives, you may not get as many results as you think you should get. If that's the case, back out to that ICPSR page and go to an ICPSR search box and do your search again, and you will likely get more results. A friend of mine who often does these presentations likes to say that we've got the Archive of Criminal Justice data and we've got the National Archive on Aging, but neither one of them may have data about aging criminals. That might be in our Social Sciences Archive, for example. Once you find a study that looks interesting, the good part about curation is that it allows us to display things in a standardized format. So every study is going to have a standardized homepage. These are being redone. This will be, that's one of the things that'll be launched in June, the new study homepages. But for now, this is what it looks like. So you've always got the title at the top, the principal investigators, and a description of the data. And if you were to scroll down in this tab, I can never fit it all in the same screenshot, you would get information about how the data were collected. Was it a face-to-face interview or a web interview, web questionnaire, things like that. Who's in the sample, what's the universe, all of that kind of information that you need to decide whether the data makes sense for your project. You also get all of the variables that are in the data sets if it has been marked up at the variable level. So if there are multiple data sets within the study, this variables tab shows you all the variables that are in all the different data sets. And so you can use that to search as well to see if your concepts are covered. And then it gives you the publications that are related to that study. So these are publications we've got, actually got librarians on staff who look at each citation, everything that the citation is tied to, each resource, to make sure that they actually use the data and it's not just sort of a citing it in passing. So this is research that was done using the data that you're looking at. And that information also helps, oops, I always forget this slide. You can also, from that main study homepage, we've got a new Explore Data tool. And if you click on that, it allows you to have a preview of the first 25 variables and 25 cases. That doesn't really tell you a lot about what's in the data, but it is useful for if you're working with students who don't know what data look like behind the scenes. But then you can also run frequencies and crosstabs on the variables in the data. The study homepage also allows you to find related studies if what you find is similar to what you want, but maybe not quite right. So many of our studies are in a series. And so we give you the link to the series and that has its own description page. And then you can link out to all of the studies in that particular series. You can use the subject terms at the bottom of the study homepage that show you how our curators have tagged each particular study. So maybe if you're looking for something about social support and you hadn't thought to look at social networks, you can click on that subject term and see what else has been tagged that way. The bibliography also lists all of the studies that were used in a particular research project. So you can see this example is taken from this NSHAP study page. This person used a lot of different data sources to conduct their analyses. And so this is helpful if you're looking for kind of what data can be used together or what data have been used together. You can take a look at the publications list for that. When you decide that the data are something that you're interested in, you can download them. You'll either have to log in if you already have a My Data or a Researcher Passport account. If you don't have one, you'll be asked to create it. It's about 3 questions, I think. What is your discipline? What is your role on campus? And can we share your data with your official representative if you're at a member institution? So quick and easy process. You can then use the download button in the middle of the page and download all of the public use data at the same time. It'll give you a drop down that looks like the one that's dropped down for the data set here. So you can pick your statistical format and download all of the data. In this case, there look like there are 8 files. Not all of them are public use. So you'd get the public use files. If you know that you just want one of those data sets, you can use the little arrow at the data set level and just download that particular data set. When you download the data, you'll get a zipped file. And in that file, along with your data, you'll get a data citation. ICPSR has been one of the leaders in trying to get people to cite data just like they would any other resource. And we try to make it easy by putting the citation on the study homepage. It's in a pop-up box you can find on the study homepage. It's in the code book, and we give it to you separately in your download. We give you the information that was on that study homepage, so you get a copy of the metadata. You get a copy of the terms of use that you've agreed to, because we all read those super carefully as we're clicking agree and downloading our data. So you get a copy of what you agreed to, and then you'll also get the code book and any other documentation. If the depositor has given us like questionnaires or interview guides, we make those available as well. And you'll get that in that zip folder. Some of our data, you'll notice, have a red bar on the side that say that they're restricted. You can apply to access those with the button in that same bar along with download. If there are restricted data in the study, that access restricted data button will show up, and you can click it and it'll give you, it'll start you into the restricted data application form. This tells you kind of what you're going to need. We usually require IRB approval, a description of your project, who's going to be working with the data, if you're using the data on your own campus, what security measures will be in place, things like that. And I didn't put here, I thought I did, but I may not have saved my slides after I did. We have 3 different ways of distributing restricted data. And we might restrict data either because there's an increased disclosure risk. We will never publish PII, but maybe there are a couple variables that could be used together that increase disclosure risk. Or if the topic is sensitive and might hurt respondents if it got out. So, and based on kind of the level of sensitivity, we have 3 options for disseminating the restricted data. So you can either get it as an encrypted download, and this is chosen by ICPSR, which ones you can use. So encrypted download for the sort of the least sensitive restricted data, virtual data enclave, where you're actually working with the data on our systems and they never leave our servers, and we vet the output from anything that you run before you can take it out, or our physical data enclave, which is directly downstairs 2 floors from where I'm sitting right now. It's a lovely room in the basement of our building. They did have someone paint scenery of the shores of Lake Michigan inside it, so it's at least not gray and dingy, but that's where the most restrictive data, you would have to come to use that. Just a quick word about our sort of special sauce. Sometimes people like to see what happens to the data once we take it in, and I know that I'm over time already, so I'm going to go really fast through this. I've linked this document to the slide so you can kind of see sort of step by step. I mentioned that our curators do the disclosure risk review. They also look at the data to make sure that there's nothing wonky in it. That's a technical term. And they work back and forth with the data provider. If there's something that they don't understand, they'll ask the questions back of the data provider. If we don't have access to the data provider, or if they're not responding, curators will also look, if there's a project website or if there have been publications using the data, they will look at those for further information. They then create that study and variable level metadata, so the study homepage, as well as the question text and variable level information, standardized code books, and then they format it for the major stat packages. And some of our data sets, about 1,500, have online analysis capabilities, and so our curators put those on if the data provider or the archive asks for it. They also do quality checks prior to turning the study over, and then they check it again once it's live in the ICPSR catalog. Not all of our studies are given the same high level of curation effort. So I mentioned we have self-published studies that we don't touch at all. We have what we call fast release. So things that we take in, we create the study homepage, but nothing else. And the zip file that we put out is what the depositor gave us. And then we have levels 1 through 3 for different kinds of different pieces of the curation process. And we kind of try to estimate how popular will these data be, things like that. How much use will they see when we make a determination sort of what level of curation they should get. And all work is done in secure computing environments until that public release. And if the data obviously are considered to be restricted, then they never go out on the public network. Deb and Amy asked, what our curation FTEs look like. And so I had to look it up. We have one curation director, 4 supervisors who supervise teams that make up 23 total curators. And I believe we're hiring 3 or 4 more at the moment. So right about 30 people working in our curation unit. And that's full-time FTEs.
And about how much do they curate on a regular basis?
That is a really good question. I think we put out between, the number that's in my head is between 100 and 200 studies a year, but I can't remember if that's only member funded studies or if that's all of them. I will look and get back to you with the answer to that.
Cool.
Because if I make something up off the top of my head, I'm going to be wrong. Yeah, I'll give you an answer later. And then I just wanted to note that in addition to curation, we also offer user support. We have project managers who work with depositors. They work with people who are trying to get access to restricted data, things like that. We've got a metadata and preservation unit who are working on how do we keep our data usable over time and make sure that it's findable. So they're creating a new schema as we speak for as we migrate our data to the new infrastructure. And then we do have librarians who are doing the publication linking. And that is it. If anything was of interest, here are different ways that you can connect with ICPSR. We're on the usual social media suspects, YouTube, all that kind of stuff, as well as an old-fashioned email announcement listserv. So with that, I will take questions if I didn't put everybody to sleep.
Oh no, we've got a lot of questions in the doc. All right, so first one. Someone approached you with an interest in integrating quantitative methods and building quantitative literacy into their courses. What are a few insights you might offer?
That is a question near and dear to my heart because I am all about quantitative literacy. We actually have a whole set of teaching and learning resources that I didn't talk about today. They're a little bit older, but the basic thing is to try to integrate working with data in some format early and often. So even in an introductory level course, you can include some data activities using something like the social sciences variables database to think about. There's someone on the U of M campus who teaches environmental science and wanted her students to know kind of they're in the public policy program, and she wanted them to know what they're going to face when they're out in the real world, because in Ann Arbor, like every other car is a Tesla or a hybrid. And she wanted them to realize that not everybody feels that way. So she took a couple of the surveys that asked environmental questions and had the class answer them and then compared them to what the national sample was. So that's a way of using data without even having students analyze it. So the more ways you can get them to touch data, the better they'll start thinking about questions like who's in the sample, when were these data collected, all that kind of thing that we take for granted as we look at numbers presented in the media or whatever. I hope that at least starts to answer the question.
Cool. And next question. What kind of resources does it take to support restricted data? For example, you'll look at a lot of institutional repositories, like based off like Dataverse or Zenodo or anything, and they don't want to touch restricted data at all.
Yep. Yeah, so each, any of our topical archives that have restricted data, a part of their project manager's job is to deal with requests for access to the restricted data. And so sometimes it's helping people fill out the application. We don't usually turn them down as long as it's a valid research purpose, but sometimes it takes 3 or 4 tries to get it through. Or figuring out who on their campus is the right person to sign a restricted data use agreement. So each topical archive has at least one person. The user support, a big part of his job is restricted data. We've got people who vet output from both the physical and the virtual data enclave. So that's probably another, at least one FTE combined between the people who do that. And then there's the tech piece, right? So there's, for the virtual data enclave, it's making sure that the right packages are in the environment for people to use that they want to use. If they want to bring data in, looking at the data, again, that's not the tech people, but it's the project manager or the project director. Look at the data to make sure that they can be brought in, and if they are also restricted data, do the people have the rights to use it? That kind of thing. So all told, there's probably, I would guess, probably between 5 and 7 FTEs worth of work in a given year. And some of our systems require like nudges. So we require annual reports every year, and one of our restricted data systems will do that nudge automatically. The other system, the project manager has to be aware of when people's restricted use agreements, when their 1-year anniversary is, and ask them for that annual report. So there's a bunch of administrative stuff that goes through it, as goes along with it as well. And then there are a couple projects where external people want a say in who uses the data and how they use it. So the patient-centered research outcomes archive, they have a review committee that includes 2 people from ICPSR, but also external experts who review every application for restricted use data. They don't get a lot. They're a relatively new archive, so they don't have a lot of data yet to begin with. But that's additional work kind of coordinating that. So it's not a small amount of effort. And then we also have our, we've got a restricted data access committee who talks about policies about that kind of thing, and a disclosure review board that deals with, like, can these data be made available in encrypted download, or do they have to be virtual data enclave when curators have a question or when something funky comes up? So a little bit of a lot of people's time.
Mhm. And then, do you know if the software for the catalog is completely custom, or did it start with a base like Dataverse?
It did not start with Dataverse. I think we are actually older. The platform is made up of, and this is where our tech people would be like, just shut your mouth. But things that I've heard over the years, like our search is based on a Solar search. Some of our databases are in Fedora, some of them are in Oracle. So it's kind of a duct tape and Band-Aids putting all things together. And that's why we're trying to rebuild some of the infrastructure to make it more sort of streamlined and plug and play. But we use products where we can, and we build them where they don't exist.
Can you get access to validated instruments through ICPSR, or do you still need to reach out to the authors for those?
That's a tricky one. In most cases, people will give us the questionnaire and it will accompany the data. In cases where the questionnaire has been copywritten, there will be a note in the code book that it's copywritten, and people will have to reach out to the data provider. Sometimes there's copywritten scales, and people are comfortable giving us the questionnaire that includes those scales. They might be 5 or 10 item scales. And there we just note that people should should cite the scale that they're using and not use it obviously for commercial purposes.
On a few occasions now, we've recommended researchers consider depositing with ICPSR. We're a member institution, so they should be able to deposit at no cost. But several researchers have asked a follow-up question about whether depositing data in the curated ICPSR under our institutional membership meets, say, the NIH's definition of open access, given that researchers at non-member institutions will have to pay for access.
That is a great question. And we get it often. So it includes one myth, which is that depositing is only free for member institutions. Depositing is actually free for anyone. We'll take data from anyone who wants to give it to us. It's who pays for the curation of those data that determines who gets it when the data are disseminated. We do meet most of the NIH agency guidelines. So the fact that our member data is only accessible to members is not as big of a restriction as people might think. I think we have penetration of like 96% of the Research One institutes in the US. So we've got, usually the people who are going to be looking to use the data are at a member institution. If they're not, there is still a way to do it. We will negotiate if, particularly like if it's a grad student or somebody at an MSI who's looking to use data that they would have to pay for, we will negotiate that. So yes, most NIH agencies have agreed that that is open enough. And there is some cost sometimes for restricted data, depending on the study and the project that is disseminating the data. But that is in line with their guidelines as well.
Cool. All right. We are getting kicked out of this Zoom room here at 2. So I think we shall call it there. But